Hello, I'm Paul Haswell,
Hello, I'm Thomas Ho.
and we are technology lawyers at Pinsent Masons in Hong Kong. We are going to talk today about 5G technology, which is one of the big buzzwords and certainly will become a bigger and bigger buzzword as the next few years go on. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, I'd assume you've heard of 5G, but just in case you haven't, Thomas, can you give everyone a bit of a sort of a dummy's guide to what 5G technology means?
So basically, 5G refers to the fifth generation of mobile network technology. It's what makes your phone tick. It's what enables you to make calls, browse Facebook, or do whatever you do on your phone. It's called 5G because this is the fifth generation of such technologies. So 1G, or the original G, is back in the 80s when you had your big...
Can I say OG? If anyone gets the ICT comment, OG?
So OG phones are your analog phones back in the 80s, where they were big and, lumbersome and, just... It looked like a piece of military equipment, right?
It did, often in a suitcase.
Yeah, so it was phones like that. And then we moved on to 2G, which was the first digital phones where you could actually encrypt your voice-to-voice calls. You moved on to 3G, where phones began to move quicker and you could browse the internet on them. 4G, even quicker. Now 5G promises to replicate essentially the same sort of paradigm shift by giving us more speed and correspondingly more functionality.
Yeah, it's essentially meant to be a massive, massive boost in speed. But it's not just speed, I understand. So obviously things will go more quickly. So what's the best way to describe it? Now, I have in my apartment, embarrassingly perhaps, but maybe not, maybe you have one too, a drawer of forgotten technology, which has all sorts of things in it. It's like one of the older iPods. I kind of hoped I'd find a Tamagotchi in there, but no luck. But I also found my iPhone 2G. I'd forgotten how curved the things were and how cumbersome back in the day. But there we go. But I thought, well, I wonder if it still works. Charge it up. Managed to find the old cables that we used to use, which were a different connector. Switched it on, put a SIM card in, and lo and behold, couldn't believe how slow it was. It was almost to the point it was unusable, let alone the fact that the iOS was a lot more clumsy than I seem to remember. You forget things very quickly in the world of tech. But as times have gone on, I mean, I'm now on a fancy pants new one, an iPhone 11 Pro or whatever it is, and it's using 4G technology, and that seems pretty quick, though sometimes I still get a bit frustrated. Is the next gen up essentially going to be all about blazing speeds, that when you use the internet on your phone, there's no more hanging around? If you're using, for example, a lot of people now, rather than making cellular calls, they use their data services to actually make phone calls. Does this mean better call quality?
It could, and if you're into watching Netflix or YouTube videos and audio and all sorts of multimedia on your phone, it will help it load faster. That's one very consumer sort of focused advantage you get. But in terms of the other functionalities you might see is actually moving beyond the world of mobile phones, and you'd see these sort of new technologies applied to other networks, mobile devices. For example, self-driving cars, right? Smart cities. You wouldn't really call a car a phone, right? But you can connect it up to the network, and it can talk to other cars on the network and essentially get cars on the road to autonomously talk to each other, drive you to your places. And this is important in terms of 5G's development, because 5G enables this sort of stuff to happen. When we talk about speed, actually, one of the things that it will lead to is lower latency. Latency is just a fancy word for lag, isn't it?
Yeah, so essentially if you, sort of a simple example is if you click on a link, and that link, how long that link takes to come back to you, that's essentially latency. There might be lots of other factors at work, but the latency could be in your connection of how quickly the web page that you're going for is being fetched and brought to your computer screen or phone or whatever you're using. So yes, that's latency. So that's less time. Actually, another way to, it's almost like a shorter string on two paper cups. More quickly the information will transfer across.
Right, and obviously if you're just watching a video or streaming a video, latency makes it extremely annoying. But if you're looking at something like a self-driving car, well, it's a matter of life and death. You can't have one car speak to another car, change lanes, and only have that information reach the other car, 5 seconds later.
Yeah, you're spinning beach ball for a while you slam into the front of the car in front.
Well, precisely. You want
back of the car in front, rather.
Exactly. You want to avoid situations like that, and the way to do it is with technologies which enable communication with greater volumes and at greater speeds, which 5G will step into that void, basically.
So it's very exciting. I mean, the smart cities angle is quite incredible, and there are people developing sensors that would connect via 5G technology, so you can monitor what's going on in a building. I mean, we're sitting currently in Pinson Mason's offices here in Hong Kong, which isn't really a smart building. No offense to Central Plaza where we are, but it's not monitoring us where the lights don't come on as we walk into rooms. It's not monitoring our temperatures. But with 5G technology, you could essentially have, without connecting to almost a central router. Think of it as you have your Wi-Fi router at home and all of your devices connect to that. Or you can have sensor technology connecting directly using 5G tech, so it's going directly through the base stations wherever they may be in Hong Kong. The chances are actually there's probably one right here in Central Plaza, either on the top or in the building. But
I mean, I think the point is well made that this is a building from the 90s, whereas, if a building was to be built and completed next year, it would obviously have a lot more of these sort of network technologies that we currently don't have.
Yeah, exactly. It's that direct connection using, because I'm using a lot of iOS devices examples. If you have an iPad with a SIM card or an eSIM, you're using that. That's often quite useful because you don't need to be always near essentially a Wi-Fi router or indeed a wired connection. Having that on greater numbers of devices, I mean, the possibilities are essentially endless. You've mentioned self-driving cars, you have bus stops, buses. In terms of simplifying, but at the same time making faster the infrastructure, the potential seems off the chart. Even if you think about it, I'm looking out the window now. There's a lot of construction sites in Hong Kong, and I presume they're using increasingly smart technologies. But having those all connected via 5G would increase basically the speed at which people can carry out tasks. And there's no worry about one central point of weakness in a network.
And I think just because of the speed and just because of the potential for information to be gathered, transmitted, saved, analyzed in real time, once you supercharge that is going to make construction a lot more, well, I wouldn't say risk-free, but reduce the risk of it to a large extent. It allows people to act quickly to issues that happen from day to day that you may not be able to predict. Well, I mean, it just lowers the risk in terms of time and cost for many people, I should think.
Yeah, great. So where are we in terms of rollout of 5G? So the first 5G phones are on the market in some jurisdictions, but 5G networks themselves, there are some in existence. A few countries are rolling them out.
I mean,
but
I
it
think
seems
the
to be
UK
slow
have
going.
one. Is that correct?
They do. There's one network provider in particular, I can't remember which one it is, who have got one up and running, and the coverage is pretty good.
Have you managed to try it out?
No, because I keep mentioning Apple devices. I'm on Apple devices, and there's still no 5G Apple device whatsoever. In fact, maybe I wasted my money when I bought my iPhone 11 Pro, because it'll probably be a new one out within the year. So I haven't tested it, though I've spoken to contacts in the industry who are astonished by how fast it is. Some of them, and I don't know whether this is people being too excited, saying you would no longer need the internet connection in your house. You could just run everything off your 5G connection, almost like running a hotspot via your phone.
So, in other words, our sort of internet plans and so on these days might go the way of landlines.
Well, it's a possibility. I mean, the suggestion that you can get as fast as 2 gigabit connection via 5G, which is faster than many people's home connection, or actually, I think it might actually be faster than mine.
It's faster than mine. Yeah,
it's faster
yeah,
than mine. And we're technology lawyers. We should be expecting and we're in Hong Kong, so we'd have the fastest. So it is coming, but it's still in its infancy. There's been challenges. Various jurisdictions have there's only a limited amount of radio spectrum. This is still being transmitted via radio waves. The whole cellular technology. So they've had to allocate spectrum in different jurisdictions, and that's been difficult because there are so many radio devices out there. But that's happening across the world. But I still think we're looking at probably another 2 years before 5G really explodes into the mainstream.
I think it might also depend on which part of the world you're in.
Yeah.
Clearly, some jurisdictions, and I'm thinking of South Korea in particular, who have really sort of been on the forefront of rolling out this technology. They had their Winter Olympics,
that's right,
where 5G was extensively deployed. I think generally it's a test case, but it goes to show that they do have the ability to make it happen. And even I think nowadays in the consumer sphere, you see more and more applications.
No, you do. China as well. They were boasting that they have the biggest 5G network in the world, and obviously they home to one of the main providers of 5G. There are various companies involved. A relatively small number of people supplying 5G technology. There's an interesting split between jurisdictions, and of course, I don't want to go into it, but there's been all of the concerns that have come out of the US about, is 5G technology secure? Which kind of brings me to my next point. Now, 5G technology itself is essentially just cellular technology supercharged. I'm not going to go into too much in the technicalities of it. Frankly, some of the more technical technicalities, I wouldn't even know where to begin. But people do seem to worry a lot about the security concerns. Now, is that well placed? I mean, I have a view, but Thomas, what do you think in terms of should we be more worried that 5G means we're all going to get hacked?
I think leaving the technical question to one side, the very basic principle is that the more data you collect or the more data you're capable of collecting, the higher the risk of a data breach.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is something well acknowledged in, for example, the GDPR, where data minimalization is a key principle. If you don't have to collect personal data, well, think about whether you should collect it. And with 5G, I think because there is the capability for it, there is also the temptation to collect more data.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, the risk of a data breach is heightened.
And the speed at which data can be transmitted now. We often have, if you're into network security at all, and maybe you are, maybe you're not, you can often monitor points on a network to see where data transmission is taking place. And if you see a sudden spike in communications, you think, well, who's accessing this system? Why is data going through here? With 5G, if everything's connecting essentially directly to the cellular network itself, it becomes more difficult. There's some responsibility still with the network provider themselves to monitor, but they're not. I mean, they're not going to suddenly change the way they operate. I would imagine that whoever's providing your cellular network now isn't responsible for you if you get hacked over 4G, for example. But that means it's much harder to track what's going on. So you can't necessarily find out if you're being attacked, who the source, who the attacker is before potentially a much more significant volume of data has been either taken, accessed, breached, and I think that is a concern. It remains to be seen. I mean, we already have very fast connections and people get hacked all the time, but we never can really predict what form a new hacking attempt is going to take. We've had various experts complain that 5G technology by its very nature is insecure. I don't agree with that. I just think we have to think how we monitor it is more of an issue.
Well, I think, again, I will look at it in terms of risk, right? Just because something might happen doesn't mean it's going to happen. So it's not a guarantee that you will get hacked. It's the likelihood that it will happen to you. And in terms of 5G, I can think of other risks. For example, DDoS, right?
Yep.
Distributed denial of service. Well, obviously, once you've got your fridge, once you've got your television, once you've got cars and traffic cameras and everything hooked up to a 5G network, well, I suppose if someone really wanted to, they can actually mount a DDoS attack using a fridge.
Yep. And actually, that links back to a bigger problem, and it's not really 5G's issue. It's the fact that there are smart devices out there, and there will continue to be many, many smart devices out there connecting, basically building our Internet of Things that won't have adequate security in place. So if you have basically a smart home, how often do you check that your devices are up to date? How often do you check the security on that device? So I admittedly have a few things. I have smart lighting, I have smart fans, I'm bought into the Alexa ecosystem, so no doubt they're listening to me all the time, but never mind, no, you can actually switch that off. That's not a worry. But even I occasionally get worried and then go around and check what the security status is on each device to make sure they're up to date. But the average consumer isn't going to do that. So that's an issue. But then translate that a bit further. We were talking about construction sites, which I think is a good example, and I can see them becoming increasingly smart, as will smart buildings as time goes on. But not everybody is going to be, essentially, how sophisticated is everyone? Not everyone will have a IT professional monitoring the smart building and everything that's going on within that. Should we be worried? Because that essentially is a massive backdoor, not just to DDoS attacks, but for people taking over devices. There was a terrible horror movie, I think from the 70s, which I always mention when people talk about smart homes, where a smart home run by a computer goes crazy and takes over and traps people in the house and makes one person's life an absolute misery. It has a very odd ending. It's called Demon Seed, if you want to look it up. I don't recommend it unless you really like bad 70s horror films. But is that a risk? Could you have, and I was speaking at basically an infrastructure conference last year where I was explaining with smart power plants, if the security's not up to scratch, you could literally have the lights switch off. I mean, this is what happened in Ukraine.
I think Iran as well, something about
that's right.
their nuclear facilities.
So should we then be scared that 5G is making this all far too easy, or do we just think, well, it's a chance we have to take?
I think the question you're asking is, do we then not do 5G because of all these risks? And the answer surely is no, we should do it anyway, but then find a way to deploy it which is measured, which is sensible, which is incremental.
Yeah.
I mean, if we were all to flick over to, it's not
We don't want to go
possible,
back
but
to
if we
2G.
flicked over to 5G too quickly and we didn't consider the security issues at every level of it, of course we're going to have some serious vulnerabilities in terms of our infrastructure, in terms of our daily lives.
I agree.
But let's say you started off just by, getting a smart fridge, and you came to terms with having a smart fridge and what it can do and what the risks of it were and how to update its sort of firmware and so on and so forth. And then you decided to expand a bit and get smart lighting, and then you decided to get a self-driving car after that. If you did it bit by bit, I think it's manageable.
Yeah, it's incremental. But the thing is, you may come home one day, find that your smart fridge has defrosted everything, and you're not very happy. Then you come back the next day, and it's trying to organise a revolution in a country somewhere
With all
in the
the other
world
fridges.
with all the other fridges. So you can't rule that out. There is always a bit of a chance. But I agree. I'm one of those people that I would rather embrace new technology than figure out what the problems are. Then it's not a lawyer's view, is it? A lawyer would typically work out what the problems are well in advance. But we don't know what they are, and we have to deal with them. Now, in terms of the law, there's two things I see will be big. In terms of the evolution of whether it's going to change how legal contracts are drafted, whether 5G technology changes the way that communications take place legally, I don't think they will. It's just an evolution.
I suppose a lot of people might be tempted to think of it in terms of smart contracts, right?
Yeah.
And there is, I think, a lot of interplay between IoT, Internet of Things, 5G on the one hand, and smart contracts. Because in my view, one of the main problems with smart contracts at the moment is the Oracle problem, where you don't have enough ways of inputting information from the real world to trigger conditions under your smart contract and code.
That's why most smart contracts to date have been fundamentally fairly straightforward things, like very, very straightforward transactions, nothing too detailed. Certainly not things that would operate in a live environment. We're back to building sites again.
Right, but if you think about a 5G world where you've got sensors collecting real-time information in large quantities, this would change things like logistics. It would change things, as you say, in construction sites. And that would, I think, to some extent supercharge the use of... It could supercharge the use of smart contracts. However, the sort of thinking that goes into constructing that contract in the first place, how to allocate risk, what to do with liability in certain circumstances, that bit of lawyering, I think, remains very human and very much, well, I wouldn't say the same, but very much a process of evolution rather than any sudden sort of big spikes.
We're not suddenly going to get completely automated contract systems, that's for sure. The only other thing that I think will be relevant, though, is cybersecurity. Now, we were talking about your smart home taking over a nation on the other side of the world. I like the idea of the rise of the fridges. I think I for one, welcome our new fridge overlords. At least we'll all be chilled. That's the worst joke I'm going to tell today. But I can see this as being a big issue as people do enter into contracts that involve an element of 5G technology. The responsibility for who is to blame, essentially, if something goes wrong. I can see there being fights in terms of the contract negotiation. Now, we've all been in contract negotiations where you start arguing about limitations of liability, often for cybersecurity issues. I have to say that's one of the points that most makes people walk out of a negotiation because they can't agree a number or can't agree who's responsible for what. I can see that getting a lot worse.
I also just want to throw this out there. When we talk about liability that we owe to each other, it's not just contract, it's also tort.
Yeah.
And some of our listeners might know of a very famous case in Scotland where a manufacturer of soft drinks had a snail in a bottle of ginger beer.
That's right.
And this bottle went to a cafe. Some woman at the cafe took this bottle, drank it, found the decomposed snail inside. And the law essentially held that, well, as the manufacturer, this was part of your duty of care, towards a woman who would be drinking your soft drink, essentially, and there was liability involved. This is something that, if you were a manufacturer of these smart devices, you might want to think about.
Yeah, well, if you're manufacturing a fridge and it does help the fridge army take over the world, you as the manufacturer may be liable in tort, potentially not just to the person who bought the fridge, who's now very upset that their milk has gone off, but also the fact that the damage done may come back to you. So you never know. There's the potential for liability, and it still comes back to cybersecurity. is phenomenal. So make sure your devices are secure, which is advice that I would be giving regardless of whether it was a 5G device or not. But I think it is going to be a very, very big issue.
I agree.
Anyway, we don't want to go on for too long, otherwise you'll get sick of the sounds of our voices. But that was our view on 5G. As I said, I think it's going to be probably another 1 or 2 years before we see it really start to come into the mainstream. But some very, very exciting things indeed are going to happen in the next few years. It's not going to be just we get to see our cat photos more quickly when we're browsing the internet. There'll be more to it than just that, I hope.
Well, I'm looking forward to it regardless.
I was Paul Haswell.
And I was Thomas Ho.
And that was Pinson Mason's Hong Kong Technology Team on 5G. Hopefully you'll listen to us again soon. Take care.